Over the past year, many nonprofits, particularly those relying on government funding, have experienced reductions or are bracing for the possibility of reductions. And beyond the numbers themselves, we know this has created a lot of uncertainty about how to plan, how to staff, and how to respond when the funding picture shifts. At the same time, we're starting to see early signs of increased attention on how funds are being used. And while it's not yet widespread, there does seem to have been a shift in posture towards a little bit more scrutiny. And that's what today's session is about, preparing for what's ahead. We'll look at the signals we're seeing, the questions organizations should be asking themselves now, and how to make sure your finance function is ready to respond clearly, confidently, and on relatively short notice. So hopping into some quick introductions, my name is Andrew Paramal. I'm a partner at BTQ Financial, and my work with the firm focuses on improving the systems and support that power our client relationships, particularly in areas like GL maintenance, financial reporting, grants and contracts, and overall financial strategy. I'll be walking us through the key ideas and questions today as more of a guide because we are joined by two of our fabulous in-house experts who will bring deep experience in grants and contracts management, audit preparedness, and government compliance. Bethany, would you like to start off with introducing yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. Hi, everyone. I'm so pleased to be with you this afternoon. My name is Bethany Burrows, and I'm the Director of Grants and Contract Management here at BTQ. I've been at BTQ for about a year now. Prior to that, I was working for a wide range of human services nonprofits for about 18 years, specifically in grants and contracts management and compliance. And I've worked on both the recipient side and also the funder side, as I did also work for 8 years as a director of budgets and grants for a component of the New York City Mayor's Office. So that's also what I do here at BTQ, just oversee grants and contracts, make sure we're in compliance and following best practices in those areas.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph Simonetti. I am the Director of Grants and Contracts Optimization at BTQ Financial. I've been here for over 9 years at this point, working with grants and contracts the entire time. Previously, I was working with the state of New Jersey, so I've been on both the government side and the client side of funding, and looking forward to the coming webinar.
Excellent, thanks. And just a quick reminder to folks, if you have any questions during today's presentation, Allison dropped this in the chat. Please feel free to click on the Q&A section and enter your question. We want to make sure to address them as we go. So quick note on BTQ Financial for those who may not be as familiar with us. We've been partnering with nonprofits for over 30 years with strong, reliable finance operations that support growth, compliance, and long-term impact. We currently work with over 70 clients across the country, managing more than $1 billion in operating budgets annually. Our team of 200 plus professionals supports the entire financial cycle, with everything from day-to-day accounting and financial management to grants and contracts management and medical billing and CFO level strategic guidance as well. One thing we're especially proud of, as you'll see on the slide here, is the depth of our relationships. 86% of our clients have been with us for more than 5 years and over a quarter for a decade or more. That kind of longevity reflects the trust and the partnership that we work very hard to build. On the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see a handful of clients that we currently work with, but it's just a small representation of our broader portfolio. So this is a little bit about us. Moving along to the next slide, we'll take a quick look at what we're going to cover today. We'll start with some context around why we believe nonprofits, especially those receiving government funding, should be preparing for a new wave of financial oversight. From there, we'll walk through a few key questions that every org should be asking themselves to assess whether their finance function is truly ready, and we'll sprinkle in some of the things that BTQ does with our clients to make sure they are ready. And of course, we'll leave time at the end to respond to any questions from you all. And a quick reminder, again, it's kind of a PSA, please drop it in the Q&A section if you do have any questions as we go. So let's hop into some of our content. What's driving the next wave of scrutiny? So let's talk about why this conversation matters in this moment. While we're not seeing a full wave of oversight changes just yet, there are clear signs that expectations around accountability are tightening, especially for those organizations receiving government funding. One example is a recent executive order indicating a renewed federal focus on preventing fraud, waste, and abuse in public spending. And while we're not exactly sure of the direct impact, it's certainly an indicator that agencies may be taking a closer look at how funds are used. We're also seeing signs that pass-through entities are beginning to require more from their subrecipients as well. That can mean more documentation, more active monitoring, and higher expectations across the board. And certainly Joe and Bethany would agree that there are additional questions that have been coming out from funders more recently that we haven't really seen before. And that means there's a broader shift towards expecting stronger internal controls, real-time compliance, not necessarily just at the audit phase, but really throughout the year. We've seen some of that informal pushback, and historically it hasn't been as significant as it is to date. So we're thinking that there might be more to come. So all these are kind of signals or indicators that there's sort of a need for us to be ready. So we know that expectations may be rising. The natural next step really would be, are we ready for it, and how do we get ready for it? So moving forward, we've put together 4 questions that nonprofits that are receiving a significant amount of government funding should be asking themselves right now. The first question is, do we have the financial clarity to answer questions from funders quickly and accurately? And this is all about clarity. If a funder came to you today with a detailed question about spend down, variances, how restricted funds were used, how quickly and confidently could your team respond? This isn't just about access to reports, it's about the quality of your data. How do your systems talk to each other? And whether your team can tell the story behind the numbers. Bethany, I'd love to bring you in here. What can organizations do to close the gap when it comes to gaining and maintaining that financial clarity?
Yes. So when thinking about this question, there are some specific actions that we would recommend organizations take. Performing a funder's question simulation is something that's always good to do. So you would want to think about questions your funders may have asked in the past, or what might they ask today? And in particular, when it comes to maximizing funds, are you overspending? Are you underspending? How would you answer those types of questions? And also, it's important for everyone to understand what the regulations are in your government contracts, and just be prepared. You do want to make sure that you have a spend down plan here at BTQ. That is a critical step for us. We work very hard with our clients to ensure that they have a spend down plan, which means how are you planning to really spend down your funds throughout the year in a way that makes sense and that funders are going to agree with. Anyone in contact with funders should have an understanding of how we're going to ensure that funds are spent effectively, even if that means doing a budget modification. And I think it's very important for finance program, all people to come together and make sure that you have an agreement and that everyone understands what that explanation would be. Also, reviewing your financial reporting tools. Technology is important, and I think BTQ definitely, we all here agree that investing in technology is incredibly important. So you want to ensure that your accounting and grant tools are effective when it comes to reporting, and running reports regularly and then checking for any accuracies, just making sure the tools are working efficiently is a must. Also make sure that staff understands the reports and how they would walk funders through reports when speaking about them, if that comes up. And then ongoing budget to actual monitoring, that's something that we here at BTQ do on a monthly basis. We would recommend that finance and program come together, definitely on at least quarterly, but really preferably monthly, to take a look at the budget, what you've spent down so far, what you have remaining, and where any changes need to be made, and just make sure that you're addressing those changes very quickly. It's very, very important to include key program personnel here, and also make sure that they understand the budget and they can read it and they're on the same page, because of course, nobody understands the program and how the funds would be spent better than program staff.
Yeah, and then just a quick thing to add is, and for those folks who are kind of going into budget season and getting that part ready, having a budget process by which you're including those stakeholders earlier certainly leads to a bigger opportunity to have those folks involved later on in the monitoring and holding them accountable for the spend as well, right? And so it occurs on the monthly sort of ongoing tracking, but it also is occurring kind of early on, making sure that those folks are engaged.
Yeah, definitely. You want to bring program in to build a strong budget to start with so that you can maximize those funds and not have to make too many changes throughout the year.
So the second question that we have on kind of our guide here is, are our internal controls not only documented, but actually working as intended? And this is really asking all about internal controls and whether they don't just exist on paper, but if they're actually working in practice. Most organizations have policies and procedures written down somewhere, but the real question is, are those documents accurate? Are staff following them? And are they helping to prevent mistakes or ensure accountability? Bethany, what are your thoughts as far as common red flags, overlooked areas when it comes to internal controls?
Well, I think the first step is, of course, making sure you have that documentation. Funders and auditors will always ask for policies and procedures manuals. So not only do you have to make sure you have one, that you know where it is, that any staff know where it is, and they understand it, they've read it, you do have to make sure to update it regularly to be in compliance with any new general accounting principles, any changes in uniform guidance. It's good to review it with funders in mind, thinking again about what questions they might want to ask. But again, ensuring that all staff are familiar with those internal policies, as well as funder policies and procedures, is very, very important. If funder asks, hey, how are you in compliance with this? How are you in compliance with my funding or federal funding in general? We want to make sure that anyone they're asking that question will be able to respond right away. And again, I can't stress enough how important it is to make sure that those manuals are up to date. Conducting simple spot checks or mini audits, it's a really helpful thing to do just to make sure that you can address issues that may come up before a real audit takes place, and then you're scrambling. So I might recommend going through a general ledger, selecting expenses at random, or maybe large expenses that a funder might be interested in, or expenses from various line items in the contract budgets, and just see how easy is it for your staff to find the invoices, find the payroll reports. Are they accurate? Are those documents in compliance with funder policies and procedures? For example, if they need to include dual signatures, do they? And are they the signatures from the correct people? And so just take a look at those things. And then after you run those mini checks, think about, okay, what went wrong and how do we ensure that we're addressing these things? So I think that kind of brings us to the third point, is reviewing past mistakes and irregularities. So you can, of course, go back to previous audit reports or previous funder findings, but also from those mini audits that you might run, you can ask yourselves, okay, what didn't work and why? Is it a staff training issue? Is it a software issue? So at BTQ, we do root cause analyses all the time to identify errors so that we can get to the heart of the matter. For example, we track any vouchers that are returned from funders. We take a look at the questions that the funders asked, and we categorize those so that it's easy for us to say, okay, where do we maybe need more training? Or is there a new requirement that a funder has where there's something that we don't quite know about yet? And why is that? And so these are things that you can do to really get ready to make sure that, again, your internal controls are there, but that they're working on the spot.
I would like to zoom in a little bit on the spot checks. So that's a spot checks or mini audits. I know could be a little bit of an aggressive word, and that can represent a little bit of a culture shift within organizations. But we can't really look at that as a way to catch our people, right? That's an opportunity. It's an opportunity, not a failure. It's a chance for us to find out if there's something that we missed, if a process is not being followed, someone's not trained, and it can be a really useful tool. You might think 5 transactions is not enough, but if you pull a handful and it's something that's recurring or consistent, then it means there's a much more pervasive issue, and it's an opportunity for you to make it better. And so setting that stage is really important, and we find that particularly helpful as well. Anything else you would add there, Bethany, or?
No, I think that's a really great point. I think the way that you frame it, make it not such a scary thing, and acknowledge that, yeah, it's a culture shift. So it might be something new. We're all brand new to this, and we expect things to come up. If you do a spot check and everything turns out perfect, you might have to do a spot check on the spot check. So I think it's normal to have things happen, and we kind of want to see things happen so that we do have things that we can address and work on.
And that's interesting, right? Because in our world and the way we sort of work with our clients, a lot of our, VPFs and practice managers, even you, Bethany and Joe as well, put that hat on with regularity, right? Let's put the funder hat on. Are we doing this right? Let's pay attention let's look a little bit more closely to something. So it is something that's sort of pervasive to our clients. It's something that might be new to organizations, but well, thanks for that, Alan. So hopping over to question 3. If a funder or auditor asks for documentation today, are we ready? And this third question is all about readiness, not just whether your organization has the documentation that funders might request, but you can actually produce it quickly and confidently when asked. Bethany, what do you see as sort of the most effective practices when it comes to staying documentation ready?
Well, centralizing documentation and making sure everyone knows where to go is so important. I'm sure everyone on this call has been in that situation where you're spending hours trying to find something and you have no idea where it is. And so having SOPs even around how to store things electronically. At BTQ, we have a very clear way of how we're filing things and like naming conventions. So if a new staff member even comes on, they're easily able to find something. And centralizing documentation that funders will commonly ask for and expect you to have at the drop of a hat and expect you to know where these things are is key. And so I call it a funder ready folder where you would have your approved budgets. You would definitely have the contracts, signed contracts. I've in the past worked for nonprofits where you might have a contract and it's not signed and you're not sure what version it is. Your audited financials, all of those things that that you use to register or renew a contract. The things that funders will commonly ask for. Everyone should know exactly where to find those, what they are, how to get them. And then when it comes to finding out quickly, you can pull something, testing your response time. Again, this might sound a little scary, but they would call like a funder fire drill would just be running kind of like a dress rehearsal, just picking a day where you're going to think about a real funder request you've had, or maybe one that you could potentially have in the future, whether it was an ad hoc request or something that an auditor asked for, and just give the team 24 hours to gather and respond to that, in this case, sort of mock request. And then you can come together and assess, debrief, what were the obstacles? Where did you hit roadblocks? And what can you do to address those things? And then, of course, when it comes to documentation, it's so important to keep things up to date. Sometimes those things that seem very simple are the things we sort of set aside. And I think it's very important to actually calendar the times when you would refresh materials, whether you have to get an updated certificate, like for liability insurance, or to make sure, again, if new staff come on board or if there's a change to your board list, you want to make those in real time. Because before you know it, you might be sending something outdated to a funder, and that could be a red flag for them, especially with all of the increased scrutiny. But again, I think calendaring times to update materials is important.
So the only thing that I would just sort of tag on is that, you know, that funder sort of fire drill or whatever we would want to call it. We had a client recently that we were kind of bringing on, and we hadn't fully onboarded yet. And they had done some submissions to a funder and were asked for follow-up detail. And because we didn't pull them onto our systems, it took several rounds of back and forth, several rounds of digging into information to try and find the support for the information that we were submitting. And so that puts you behind. And that was a request that, Joe and Bethany, you can attest to this because you were involved in it, was something that we had not really seen before from this particular funder. And so it's why we're thinking a little bit more proactively. And so these kinds of drills or these kinds of reviews give you a chance to stress test your systems and your processes. I'd also just want to highlight something that we do really more to stay audit ready at BTQ is something called the 9-month audit review. And it's part of our regular process. All of our clients, 9 months in throughout the year, 9 months into the year, we would review if we are ready for that audit. And so the idea is to make sure that we create that sort of culture of readiness for when we get into the audit cycle, that nothing hits us off guard, that we're sort of ready to go, and we have all our ducks in the proverbial row. Anything you would add to that, Bethany or Joe? Or
Well, I think you made a really good point when you talked about a question coming from a funder that we hadn't seen before, because I think I've been talking about, hey, take a look at past requests, but definitely we do want to be prepared for something that's unanticipated. So you can get creative and think about what might a funder ask for. And because any question that comes, you should be prepared for.
Sure. So along that same line of thinking, as we move into question 4, are we prepared for more informal or discretionary oversight? And this question really, we're looking at one that folks can kind of overlook a bit, right? And to your point, the things that might come that we're not necessarily thinking about on an ongoing basis. Are we prepared for that informal or discretionary oversight that comes back with an email to a funder or a check-in? And what we're talking about here are unexpected, mid-year update, out of cycle ask, any kind of out of the ordinary ask for financial detail or justification. And they're not full audits, but really they can be just as revealing if the funder comes back with you with a one-off question and it takes you an inordinate long period of time to get back to them. And how quickly or how clearly you respond can either build confidence or raise concerns. Bethany, what should organizations keep in mind when it comes to preparing for this type of oversight, which seems to be happening a little bit more frequently and is new?
Yeah, well, I think building close, consistent relationships, strong relationships with funders is very key. Sometimes that's difficult. When before I was working for the city of New York, I was always wondering, where are these people? And then I kind of saw sometimes they're just very, very busy. But when you can find that one person, whether it's your program officer or somebody that can go knock on the program officer's door, just having a good contact at a funder's office is so helpful, because I think you can go to them for advice, figure out what might be in the pipeline. It also helps those funders to be more trusting of you. And it helps have some more, it allows for, I think, some more transparent communication where you might feel more comfortable letting them know, where you might be stuck, or so I think that, funder relationship building is really key. And again, I think also building relationships with other nonprofits is helpful here. And the reason for that is that if you're having trouble getting in touch with a funder, maybe you can reach out to another nonprofit that has the same funder and get some advice, or be put in touch with another contact. I mean, here at BTQ, I really appreciate the fact that if I'm having trouble getting, I mean, just today I asked someone, hey, do you have a contact at this department for this program? Because I have some questions, and they did. And so that was incredibly useful. And then again, just to think about technology, with these sort of ad hoc questions, or again, like just asking for something very quickly, or questions that you might not be totally prepared to ask, I think leveraging technology is incredibly helpful. Here, automation, I mean, when I was working in the nonprofit sector, we really, none of the nonprofits I worked for had anything automated, but I do think it's worth investing in, because when you're able to run something with a click of a button, whereas before you were taking, it could be months to put together a report and make sure it was accurate, and, you know, have it reviewed by so many people. It just, it builds confidence of the funder, because again, you're responding quickly, but it also frees you and your team up to do things that are, you know, to run your excellent programs.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point you mentioned, Bethany, like having the experience of working with over 70 nonprofits. We have over the period of time we've been around, developed some really strong relationships across the sort of the funder universe, and sort of able to navigate that. And as you mentioned, kind of reaching out across different portfolios and clients to get that, and that's something that it's somewhat unique to us. But just to double click on that for the folks on the call, strengthen those relationships, picking up the phone, and it's up and down sort of the ladder of the funding agency. You want your executives to be kind of reaching out to those who are higher up in those agencies as well. It helps out with gaining clarity, or being able to understand what the need might be and what might be coming. And like I said, it's interesting that we sort of been able to do that on our side. So those are our sort of 4 overarching questions that we wanted to provide with you, not necessarily as a checklist, but really as a kind of a framework. And as we look ahead and jump to the next slide, it really comes down to preparation and not necessarily perfection. It's about having enough structure and visibility in place so that if something comes back from an organization that has granted you resources or has contracted you to provide resources, your team can respond with that clarity and confidence. And that might mean tightening up your documentation workflows, aligning how your ledger maps to funder requirements, or simply checking in on whether internal controls are still working the way you think they are, or what's written down in some of your policy and procedures. And on the communication side, it's just as much about maintaining good relationships, being proactive, responsive, and building trust over time. As I mentioned, this isn't necessarily a checklist for you all. It's much more conversation starters. And hopefully they help you and your team reflect on where you're strong and where you may want to dig in a little deeper. So that brings our sort of content to a bit of a close today. But as we've discussed, being ready for greater scrutiny isn't just about responding, right? It's about building structure and maintaining that clarity. And at BTQ, we support that work every day, whether that's managing those core accounting and reporting processes, helping you track and stay compliant with your complex grants and contracts, or improving how revenues build and collected. Our focus is and always has been on making sure that finance function that supports nonprofits is solely focused on the mission and doesn't slow down the effectiveness of that mission. And because we work across such a wide range of nonprofits, we have a strong sense of what funders are asking for and how to help those organizations prepare with confidence. So on the screen right now is just kind of a very high level overview of some of the services that we offer to folks out there in the space. And with that, we'd love to hear from you. What's resonating most from today's conversation? Any questions, anything coming up specifically in your organization? Sure, Joe and Bethany would love to take some of those.
Yeah, thank you so much. So just looking at a couple questions we've got from the audience. The first one, what's a practical way to involve program staff in budget accountability? Joe, I think this would be a good one for you to answer if you don't mind.
Sure. So, one of what we do at BTQ is, the budget is a collaborative process. It has to be with the program staff. It gives them a sense of accountability for what they're spending, but also it gives us as fiscal, individuals, more of an understanding of their budget and how they're spending. And then from there, really meeting regularly, as Bethany had mentioned before, with program staff, monthly, quarterly, reviewing the expenses, making sure they align with the program goals that the funders have agreed to. Planning out the future, as Bethany said, with spend down, and just regularly meeting, having the conversation, being informed of any programmatic changes that could affect budgets and spending and what changes need to be made. So you're not scrambling at the end. Funders don't like that. That has always been an area of enhanced scrutiny if you're spending down in the last month. So just having that planning with the program is, I think, really important. Bethany, I don't know if you had anything to add as well.
No, I mean, I think I always tell nonprofits and I mean, every nonprofit I work for, I've always talked to my staff about this a lot, and nonprofits that I work with now, I always talk about not operating in silos. I think it's just so important that everyone's on the same page and you're not thinking, okay, this is administration, this is a program. You have to have buy-in from everyone, right? So everyone has to be on the same page and understand why are funders coming to us with these questions. I mean, we have to remind them that we are accountable. And if it's a government funder, we're accountable to taxpayers. Sometimes it's as simple as that. But I think the more buy-in you have and the more that everyone's on the same page and working as a team, definitely the better.
Thank you. And then this next one, are there any resources or tools you recommend to keep up to date on regulatory changes or shifting federal priorities? Bethany, would you mind taking that one to start?
Yeah, so the number one place that I go to get any information on federal changes, it's like the uniform guidance, which provides like the rules and regulations the federal government has established for contracting nonprofits, and is also guidance that does trickle down to state, city, county funders as well. Is grants.gov, and it's a wonderful, very easy to use website. It has a lot of information on it. It's easy to navigate, and there are listservs that you can subscribe to from grants.gov, where they will send you announcements about changing policies and procedures. And and for any government contract or grant that you might have, you again having that great relationship with somebody, with a funder, is wonderful. And ask them if they have listservs too. A lot of or regular emails that go out, you want to be on the list, you want to be in the know, and not all funders advertise that sort of communication in the same way or as regularly. So I would go to them and just ask the question, like, how do I stay in the know? I've certainly had to do that lately and learned about lines of communication that I wasn't aware of. There's other sites, and we can send them out, I think, after this call, if that's helpful, Allison, but links to other sites, such as there's a National Council of Nonprofits, and then just where to find that uniform guidance that I spoke of. Because I do think anyone receiving federal funding, it's not the most fun information to look through unless you're a big grants and contracts nerd like I am, but but I think everyone should have an idea of what's in there.
Thanks, Bethany. I'll be sure to include that in the follow-up email. So when we send out the recording later in the week, you'll also get those resources that Bethany mentioned today and a few others. And then one other question we had from the audience, what funder questions have you seen lately that are more unusual? And Joe, would you mind taking this one?
Sure. So we have seen, requests for line item detail, line item general ledger detail to support the amount that we've requested, which had not been, requested previously. And that's where Andrew had talked about systems and making sure we're ready for that request. Just very critical. We've also seen how funders are looking at, the amounts that you're requesting, and how they vary. And if it's not consistent, that will seem to trigger a request quicker than normal. We've also seen just narratives of what are you using the funds for. So, we know foundations will do that, maybe at the end of a period, but, even with government funding, we've seen, tell us how these expenses were used and making sure that they're aligned with the program goals. So those have been the main newer requests, basically, the backup justification for those expenses that were claimed, which delays, unfortunately, delays payment back to the to nonprofits, which we know cash is critical always, and being ready was really important for our agencies to make sure the cash kept coming in the door as expected.
I've also seen more and more funders asking for supporting documentation. We've had some government contracts with clients that had government contracts before the supporting documentation, such as payroll reports or invoices, was minimal, but suddenly they do want that, and not just reports of the expenditures, but also proof of payment to vendors too. So not just, the packing slip or the invoice, but actually like copies of the checks. So that's more documentation where you definitely want to have a standard operating procedure around where those things are filed, how to find them, how to get them quickly, and also make sure that they're in compliance.
Thank you. And I think this question might be a good one for Andrew. So the attendee is looking for suggestions on a good process or an action plan, contingency planning, if you will, if you have a huge loss of funding because of any government changes. So any suggestions you have there on how to...
Absolutely. And I think a great question, of course. I think Joe and Bethany can also add some insight here as well. So one of the things we do with many of our clients, especially in this sort of time frame, is evaluating all of our revenue streams, assigning some type of estimated probability of if that funding stream were to go away or get reduced, right? And it's somewhat difficult to do if you don't have a clear financial picture. So it starts with making sure that you have a good grasp of how your funding is structured, how your programs are being funded by certain specific streams. But we'll assume that that is the case. We have that sort of strong understanding, and then it's looking at each stream and understanding the underlying programs that would be impacted by it and making those assumptions. And you mentioned scenario planning. Depends on the number of scenarios you'd like to run, but absolutely would have to think about if X percentage is removed from funding stream one, how does that materially have an impact on the ground? And making some really tough decisions based on that. And that's how your planning kind of gets put into place. There's different sort of varying degrees, and you can adjust those percentages, but that's where we would start, is look at the stream, look at the specific contract or grant that we have in place. What is the likelihood that this one would go away? What is it funding? How do we restructure? Do we need to move other things in other places? Do we have to go after additional revenue streams? I know it's something that's sort of talked about ad nauseum. Go after additional revenue streams is not as easy, right, in the space. But that's where we start and then kind of move from there. I know, Joe, you're kind of working through one of those right now. I don't know if anything you would add.
Yeah, just making sure you understand the cost of running the program, fixed costs. So if it's a building, what are those utilities costing? What expenses will still continue if the funding shuts off, right? How long can you go without certain expenses being maintained at sites? What are you leasing versus what do you own? And again, everything else Andrew said obviously is critical, diversifying, but also what happens to those expenses? Will someone else fund them? Is there room in those budgets to fund those? Is there opportunities for other programs in those locations? Can you consolidate? If you have a program with, 6 sites, can you use 4? Also looking at your funded capacity of, whether it be participants, units, et cetera, and utilization. So if you're not at 100%, are your expenses at 100%, right? And really making some sometimes tough decisions about how to consolidate before even getting cut, to help with brace for that impact almost. And again, I'll echo everything Andrew said about, starting with the budget is critical as well. So.
Great. Well, thank you. That wraps up our question portion, and I'll just move over to this slide. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us online at btqfinancial.com, and you can request a meeting at the contact us portion of the website, or you can connect with us on LinkedIn as well. And I want to thank our presenters, Andrew, Joe, and Bethany today. This was a really important webinar, and I'm glad that you were able to deliver this content to everyone. And thank you, all the audience members, for joining us as well. And we hope you have a great rest of your day.